Well, it's a very serious incident, primarily because the North has targeted a civilian centre of population on Pyongyang Island. I think were it just to be border posturing, there might be some degree of forewarning over this issue, but the extent of the barrage and the fact that it's targeted civilians means that this is a severe act of provocation. I think this is part of a ratcheted campaign of provocation by the North, and in particular in the wake of the sinking of the Cheonan corvette in March earlier this year, and more recently the revelations of uranium enrichment. I think this is part of a steady campaign of provocation by the North, and the latest in a series of deliberate actions. Technically, the North and the South are still at war. The agreement from 1953 was actually a ceasefire agreement with the idea of a treaty to be etched out later in time. The intervening time has been prolonged considerably, but both sides technically are still at war, but under a ceasefire agreement. So in that sense, it shows what a brittle situation is facing both sides across the demilitarized zone, and the potential for escalation is very pertinent.
South Korea could probably withstand a North Korean attack, and that is due to one reason. It's the modernization of South Korean and U.S. military capabilities, the ability to strike behind North Korean lines. Having said that, this could not be done without severe civilian casualties. Seoul, the capital city, one of the most populated and industrious parts of South Korea, is within artillery distance of North Korea, and it's almost likely that if a full-scale conflict were to take place, both capital cities would suffer large casualties on the first day. The South Korean reaction will fall under two broad lines. The first line will be to minimize the fallout of this on the undergoing preparations for returning to six-party talks. South Korea's main priority still remains to denuclearize the peninsula. That is a high priority for them. On the other hand, they will be very fearful of not reacting strongly and being seen as too weak by the North. So they will try to balance a kind of stern reaction, a kind of energization of the military alliance with the U.S. as a type of warning to North Korea, but at the same time they will still be looking at diplomatic options. The reactions of the big players has fallen in a fairly consistent pattern of trying to play down the conflict. I think both China and the United States reacted very different from the sinking of the South Korean corvette, the Cheonan. However, having said that, both states realized that moving out of the status quo, unfreezing the conflict which is on the Korean peninsula, using force of some way is unimaginable. So I think you're seeing, again from the U.S., an intention to reassure its own ally, South Korea, and probably some exercises with South Korea to prove a point to the North.
Recently, China's been under criticism for its intransigence over confrontation across the demilitarized zone, in particular backing the northern regime, and at the same time appearing to tone down international criticism of the sinking of the Cheonan warship, which was actually very close to where the artillery bombardment has taken place. China will continue to support the North. They are long-term allies, and they are brothers in arms. It's been very often lauded by both sides that they have the same ideology and the same Marxist-Leninist roots. More recently, though, China has become irritated with North Korea's wildcard actions, in particular its nuclear proliferation activities and its program of nuclear armament. But I think China will remain an all-weather ally of North Korea because it is in its interest to maintain a buffer zone between itself and the South and US interests on the peninsula. I think China will face increasing international pressure and scrutiny over its reaction to this latest incident. And China is increasingly viewed as the only country which has leverage over the North anyway. So I think we're reaching a litmus test for China in its ability to be a responsible international player, as many of the Western governments would wish it to be.
It's highly likely that any sort of conflict on the Korean Peninsula would cause, I think, regional problems rather than just on the peninsula. I mean, South Korea is, after all, the world's 11th largest economy, and we've already seen a hit taken by today's attack. Although that could be a very short-term thing, I think a long-term conflict would have dire consequences for the region. There's all sorts of reasons for that, but one of the facts is that South Korea's economy is a major driver for the region. It feeds into the Chinese economy. It also has large links with the Japanese economy. All of those links would be broken by a conflict, and I think would cause severe strains on what is the world's fastest growing economic region.
There is a sound of inevitability ringing in the wake of this barrage, artillery barrage. Having said that, both sides will not want to go to all-out war because this confrontation is about a divided nation, and ultimately Koreans on both sides of the border stand to be the victims of any future confrontation. But I imagine that before it gets better, it's likely to get worse. And unless the nuclear posturing on the peninsula can be resolved, the six-party talks are in effect dead and are window dressing. And you have the strategic interests of the US and China and other partners, which is to denuclearize the peninsula. But the North's stated aims is to pursue a program of nuclear armament. So therein lies the problem at a strategic level.